We're gonna play football. Yippee!
It's game over, man. It's game over.
You're listening to The Review on the OSG Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys College Football Podcast, and guess what? Not only do you have three online sports guys this week, you have the original OG himself, OSG J-Dub, comes out of retirement and joins us for this week's episode. Welcome, Brad. Welcome back, brother J-Dub. Great to see you, my friend.
It's good to see an old face around.
Feels like I never left. So thanks for having me back.
For those of you unfamiliar with our history, years and years and years and years ago, we had a radio show that aired online in a couple of different places that was kind of the brainchild of brother J-Dub himself, and who produced it and did all the work for it. And it aired in a couple of different online radio networks. It's kind of the forebearer of this show, what birthed this show, the format and the way we kind of do things. And J-Dub wanted to kind of come back and pay us a visit and see how things are going. So we figured, hey, why not?
And if you're good on the interwebs, you can probably still find point counterpoint somewhere in the dark recesses of the dark web.
And
By the way, point counterpoint.
And J-Dub, let's hope this is a regular or at least an occasional occurrence, because it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm a high school teacher in the age of COVID. Where else am I going to be on a Sunday?
Guys, we might as well go ahead and get started here because we've got a lot to talk about. Some big news in the world of college football this week, probably leading off with both the Pac-12 and the Big Ten announced they are going to play a conference-only schedule in 2020. The implications of this being that these are two of the Power Five. These are two of the bigger conferences in college football. It has a ripple effect. It's going to affect a whole bunch of different schools on a whole bunch of different levels. I'll let whoever wants to take the floor here go with it.
No, it's got to be J-Dub because he's back, so J-Dub's got to go first.
Well, what are the implications here? What's it mean for the game? Are we going to see this with everybody else?
Well, you got to think about this. I mean, as someone who's been a college athlete and who, as an umpire, I'm on the field with these guys all the time, the implications conference-wide are horrific. I mean, as a college umpire last year, I lost probably 75 to 80 games because of COVID. And you got to think about the implications to schools and to budgets and allotments. And it's a financial horrific burden on these schools. And if they don't play, where's the money coming in? And you got to think that, what's more important? Is it the money or is it the players and coaches' safety? When you've got schools that aren't even meeting and can't be in the building, there's the argument of what it means you're going to have 22 guys on a field, that you're less than, you can't socially distance in the scrum. So I think that, the implication for this, I mean, it's like they always say, you got to have back in the Great Depression when you had the penny arcades and the horse races, you had to be able to have hope. And I think a lot of people look at sports as a hope and something to pull for. And so there's the social implication, there's the financial implication, and just for these guys' livelihood. I mean, some of these guys trying to go pro, I mean, what are they going to do if they're sitting on the sidelines? It's just, there's so many different ripple effects. You can't just say one implication.
Wilkie, is this the precursor to us seeing an abridged season, if we see a season at all?
Well, I say this. I'm getting more and more pessimistic about whether we're going to have a season or not. And this week really kind of moved the needle for me in that regard. When the Ivy League came out and said that they were going to cancel all fall athletics, including football, okay, my first initial thought was, when's the last time the Ivy League mattered in football? 100 years ago?
Yeah.
Other than Harvard, Yale, do you really care about Penn and Princeton? But I think it really triggered Kevin Warren, the Big Ten commissioner, into saying, okay, we got to do something. And I don't know what kind of internal pressure he's feeling or from the presidents of the Big Ten universities, but he obviously had to act, and he made his act that we're going to play conference-only games. And then I got to thinking, I think a lot of people in the media is thinking, is that really a good decision? I mean, think about, you're talking about the social distance aspect, the travel aspect, and so forth. Maryland has canceled a game with Towson, which is in Baltimore, which is driving distance, but they're going to go to Evanston, Illinois, which is 715 miles to play Northwestern. Illinois State, they canceled their game with, or Illinois has canceled a game with Illinois State. Normal is just right up the road from Champaign, but they're going to go to Rutgers. And Nebraska has canceled a game with South Dakota State. Brookings isn't very far from Lincoln, Nebraska, but they're going to go to Rutgers. They're going to go to Piscataway, New Jersey, 1,200 miles, almost 1,300 miles. So I just don't get the decision as to why you're going to go conference only when you have that great mileage that you have to travel in conference only, and you're going to cancel games. I mean, come on, Cyhawk, you're going to cancel Cyhawk and let Iowa go to a great beyond and play? To me, on the surface, it just doesn't make sense as a remedy to all this. And so if that's the case, it's almost as if you want to cancel the season.
Then what do you do for a conference like the Pioneer League where you've got people from coast to coast as far as a conference game?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're the ones that announced they're going to do conference only as well. Again, that is a good question, J-Dub, but they don't have the travel budgets or the television income that the Big Ten has. So there just doesn't seem to be a lot of foresight there. And this is where I really credit John Swafford, Greg Sankey, and Bill Bowlesby, the commissioners of the ACC, SEC, and Big 12. They're letting the dust settle and being very reasonable about this. Obviously, Larry Scott at the Pac-12 has also announced it's going to be a conference-only schedule. I got to credit those three commissioners from the Big 12, ACC, and SEC for letting the dust settle and just see where we're at as we get toward the end of July. I think it's a very reasonable approach by those three.
John, does this put pressure on those commissioners to make a decision? Does this kind of force their hand?
I don't know if it necessarily forces their hand, but it does put them on the clock. And the aspect in all of this that I've been looking at this entire time, once these announcements were made where you're going completely non-con with the Power Fives, $22 million has been pulled off the table for Group of Five, for Go Five schools, for FCS schools. I want to say it's 36 institutions are now going to be without $22 million. And think about the trickle-down effect that you're going to have with these schools in the Go Fives and the FCS, where they're not going to have that revenue to help out with their break-even sports and their non-revenue sports going forward. So what I'm going to be paying attention to in all of this is that idea of, all right, well, we're not going to schedule these games. We're going to go completely conference only, but how it impacts these athletics departments all around the country for not having this revenue. We've already seen it in a couple of other places before all of this was put together. Boise State has gotten rid of baseball and a couple of other sports in this last week and a half or so. And I think that look at these institutions and how many more of these sports are going to go by the wayside because they don't have the revenue that they're counting on for these paycheck games, Phil.
Well, to go to your point, John,
yeah.
Northern Iowa's game against Iowa has been canceled. So they will not get around $700,000 guaranteed money, and they won't get the buyout either, which was $300,000 because of the act of God clause that was initiated with the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. So they're screwed both ways there. Mm-hmm. So now the people in Cedar Falls are going to have to make some kind of decisions. They got one of the top wrestling programs in the country, and that could be on the chopping block if this continues.
Yeah. And speaking of speaking of the Pac-12, didn't Stanford get rid of
Yes.
like 14 sports a week or so ago?
Yeah,
And
not-
Larry
yeah.
Scott has COVID now. I mean,
Yeah.
lots of things
Yeah,
going on.
best wishes to Commissioner Scott. I also understand that the buyouts for some of these games are kind of depending on how the contract itself was written. Some have a force majeure in there.
Right.
Some have individual clauses. And I know some of the schools, I think Georgia and a couple other people, are still paying out the teams that they were going to play and probably won't be able to play. But it varies wildly based on the individual contract.
Yeah.
J-Dub, I'll ask you this. SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey went on one of the ESPN radio talk shows yesterday and had some serious concerns about the fact that he's not so sure that they're even going to be able to play. SEC being the big dog in all this, is that something that we're looking at here down the road? I mean, we're on the clock, really, because within the next 2 weeks, if they don't start or make a decision, most teams are starting practice, starting full contact workouts here, if not now, by August 1st. And we're basically 2 weeks out from August 1st.
Yeah, I mean, in that interview with I think it was Marty and McGee. He was talking about, they're putting the medical advisory group together, and he's very concerned. I think he said high to very high about it. But he also said in that interview something that was interesting, that he's not pressured by other people's decisions. He said this is literally playing out every day, and he's going to make the decision that's best for the conference, and the time frame that's best for the conference. And speaking of the SEC, you were talking about those guarantees. Me for one, being a kind of a pseudo Tennessee fan, that Georgia State game last year still stings. And I'm okay with some of these those games not happening. But you think about the implication. I think we're on the clock, but these big conferences, the Big 12, SEC, ACC, like Wilkie said earlier, I mean, I applaud them for waiting. Then these knee-jerk reactions of canceling everything. I think there's too much money involved. And you look at, especially Alabama. Should Alabama be afraid that they're not playing potentially non-conference games? That's where they get all their roles. Just as a knock into the Roll Tide there. But I just think they're focusing on reality. I think they're focusing on what's the health of the players and the coaches and the staff and the travel considerations. But yeah, we're on the clock, and I think something's going to happen sooner than later, but you will not see Sankey go first. You won't do it.
Wilkie, do you think they might delay the season, maybe start it a week or two later than normal, and which would be the reason why they would go with this conference schedule to lessen the schedule and the amount of games played?
First of all, J-Dub, don't cry me anything about Georgia State. Try to be an Arkansas fan.
I wasn't going to say anything.
That's a first.
Look at the whip marks on my back.
I'm currently a Kansas fan. We've won 3 conference games, I think, in like 50 years. So
and you spent more money on a lawsuit than the actual buyout itself.
Oh.
So
All right,
let's not talk about football programs right now.
All right, Phil. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I think your question was about delaying the season and so forth. Look, I look at it this way on the SEC perspective. I think they're hell bent to have a normal season, to be honest with you. And yeah, it is about the money. I agree. But think of the pressure that the ADs and the presidents of the universities are going to be getting both internally and externally from fans.
You want pitchforks and tiki torches, Wilkie, if these decisions are made?
I'm thinking hey, we all 4 of us are in the footprint, and we know what the hardcore SEC fans, who they are, and those college football Saturdays are precious. And don't discount that as being a factor in some of these decisions. We all know the business side of it. We've been around it. We all know what's internally going on into some of these athletic programs and conferences because we've been around it. but we've also been around the other element. And don't discount that as being part of the decision making. That's why I find it quite interesting that the three conferences with really rabid fan bases, the ACC, the Big 12, and the SEC, have kind of cooled their jets a little bit as far as what they're going to do, whether it's conference only, whether it's a full season, or maybe they're just going to play 5 games or whatever. I mean, I think you've got to put that into the equation.
Wouldn't be prudent. Wouldn't be prudent at all.
Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent at this juncture.
Do you think that possibly they're trying to? I mean, think about imagine if Swafford said 2 months ago, we're not playing at all, and then all of a sudden things happen and things get better, and then do you think conferences are worried about making these knee-jerk reactions and the fallout from them, and then the recovery if they have to backtrack?
I think that's part of it. But again, I think cooler heads have prevailed as of right now with those 3 conferences that I've mentioned. And yeah, I don't think the perspective was there a couple months ago as to whether we should go on or whether we should cancel. We're getting to that point now. And we're seeing the ones that are nervous and just making the knee-jerk reactions, and we're seeing the ones that have a calmer head and are letting the chips fall where they may.
And 2 of those 3 have the largest payouts to their schools because of their television contracts with the 4-letter.
I'll throw it out to you guys. Imagine if you're Boston College and you've got a road trip to Miami, and I'm not sure if they're playing there this year, but Miami's arguably the biggest single hot spot in the country as we speak.
Well, BC does. Either BC goes to Tallahassee or vice versa. So there's that aspect.
Yeah. How do you explain that to kids and to a family that, okay, we're traveling to Florida right now. Yeah, they might be having a little bit of a problem, but it's okay. We have to play.
Hey, I'm going to Florida next week. Nice
exactly.
reaction.
All right.
Nice
So here's your conference games for BC this year. And sorry, J-Dub, you're being gypped out of an away game with BC and Lawrence. They host Clemson. They host Louisville, go to Blacksburg, go to NC State, go to Tallahassee November 14th,
okay,
host North Carolina the week after, finish their conference schedule at Wake Forest.
Truist Field.
So they do, yeah, that's right. So they do go to Tallahassee. So how comfortable is BC going to Tallahassee?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Or if a Rutgers has a game
how comfortable are you to go to Boston?
More comfortable. I would be more comfortable if I had a team in the Northeast right now than I would have been a couple months ago. I think that the way that I've.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, because of how things have transpired, I mean, I've always thought of this as throwing the rock in the pond, and we've seen everything go like this. If you want to consider the Northeast the epicenter of one of the points of when the whole pandemic started, it has come out like ripples of waves in a pool. And now that everything has calmed down in that center, I would be more comfortable traveling to the Northeast to play a football game than I would the inverse.
Well, speaking of Northeast, not really Northeast, this is a bad transition, but how do these conference plans deal with some of these independent schools like Notre Dame? I mean, where do they fall out here with conference schedules? They're not in a conference.
But they do have 5 or 6 games with the ACC already. Mm-hmm. And one of the contingency plans is if the ACC decides to go conference only, then those games that were lost on the conference level, Notre Dame would get those. So they have that as a contingency plan for Notre Dame if they decide to go, if the ACC decides conference only. If the ACC decides we're going to stick to our guns and stay as is, Notre Dame's got some scrambling to do because they've got about 6 games are on the schedule, and they can't play BYU 4 or 5 times a year.
No,
BYU, Who's the other? Yeah, Navy, New Mexico State, right?
Navy, Arkansas, Western Michigan, and then you get into conference play. So, yeah, right now at the top of the board, it's Navy and Arkansas with their first 2 games this year.
And J-Dub, I've got a question for you since you and I are kind of the resident ACC guys here. If that happens, if Notre Dame is in a conference-only schedule with ACC, do they qualify for the championship game?
Ooh, probably on history only. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the only way. And that's an interesting question.
The TV networks aren't going to turn down the notion of a Notre Dame and an ACC title game.
Especially after we've had 7 and 5 Coastal Division champions.
Based on last year's numbers, if a Notre Dame Clemson championship game probably would make John Swafford start drooling.
Absolutely.
Be a great retirement gift for him.
Yeah, it would. Absolutely.
And another thing about Big 12 potentially only going conference, Kansas has Coastal Carolina on their schedule in a 2-for-1. And last year, Coastal went into Lawrence and beat them by like 35 points. So, again, while I'd be happy to see the Jayhawks in Myrtle Beach, I don't necessarily – A, I don't want to go down to Myrtle Beach because of, the COVID. But B, I don't necessarily want to lose to the Chanticleers anymor.
I'm just saying. I'm just having this vision of Les Miles with black socks on and a metal detector walking around the beach of Myrtle Beach.
White sandals.
Sandals.
White sandals, dark socks.
Some kind of weird
coach's
shorts. No, I'm thinking like some Bermuda shorts or some kind of very unattractive pattern and with unattractive colors and maybe
some Panama Jack straw hat.
Yeah, with the Jayhawk logo on his t-shirt.
Somehow I'm thinking he won't enjoy eating the sand as much as he did grass.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
No.
Folks, and for those of you new to the show, this is the OSG Sports Show college football podcast called The Review.
Same.
Don't forget, you can find us online. You can download our phone app. It's free. This is the part where John flashes his phone at us.
Well, J-Dub did it too, but his phone was off.
No, I showed my Jayhawk lock screen, so that's what I showed.
You can look us up on the Google Play Store and the Apple Store. Look up OSG Sports. We will pop up. Download the app. It doesn't cost a thing, and you get all this fun programming and so much more. We're on the web at theonlinesportsguys.com with opinions, thoughts, and things left unsaid. Same thing for social media. Look up OSG Sports on both Facebook and Twitter. Boom, there we are. Guys, moving on here a little bit, since we're still in a COVID kind of block. I almost said break.
Which we are close to.
Out of Maryland that workouts have ended for the football team as 9 players tested positive.
Yep.
Add them to the list that includes Ohio State, that includes so many other programs. That's why when we were talking earlier in the show about things getting delayed, at the very minimum, I could see where things don't start until week 2 or week 3, which would make a conference schedule a little bit more sensible in that respect. Because this really hurts a program, particularly if they've got to sit out for 14 days, as most requests are, because today, as we record this, it's July 12th or 13th.
Wow.
And you're talking about butting up right to the end of the month there. Is this the trend here?
Okay.
John?
Right. So here's my thought, and it's key. I think that it's key to the whole process. I think that, and it's my mantra. It's the same word that I'm going to say 3 times: testing, testing, testing. Okay, now that you've got a positive, quarantine those athletes, give them another test to see if that first test was conclusive and correct. So I think that it comes down to that follow-up exam, figuring out if that first positive was in fact the correct one, or it came up inconclusive, came up with a negative test for the 3rd time, whatever. But I think that all of this comes down to testing, quarantine, and making sure that they're away from the rest of the population. And, if it comes down to having to test the entire team, which is what I think you should do anyway when you have these 9 positives in the first place, test the entire team and figure it out from there. But I think that it's going to come up to the second test for those 9, the second test for any college football program. And I think that this is also another wake-up call for college football, where they have to test their athletes coming in. You test your athletes coming into your environment. You test them when they're in your environment, not just because, oh, by the way, we have a positive test show up all of a sudden. I think that the monitoring needs to start before they come into campus. Then you have an eye on it. Then you continue to monitor them while they're in practice, and then go forward from there. Instead of all of a sudden, I don't feel well, we'll give you a test. I think it should happen continue to happen during, and then get yourself toward a continual idea about how you want to make sure that everybody's healthy.
And as one of the four, but I think I'm the only one here that actually had COVID.
Yes.
That I know by the time I got sick, I'd already had it for a couple of weeks. So, by the time you start feeling the symptoms, it's too late. And I agree with you, John, that we need to test more. But I'm up here in North Carolina HQ, and I'm in the middle of outbreaks at Carolina, at NC State. Clemson had theirs. And, all these schools are, you're seeing these programs with the increase in testing and increase in positives. I mean, yeah, that's a bad sign. And I think that once you quarantine for 2-3 weeks, I quarantined for 6 weeks because I was that bad off. And it's going to be a hard decision.
Wilkie, we talked in the first part of this block about delaying the season. How long, and J-Dub, this question goes to you too, because you actually played college football. How long do we need to get guys ready to play a season? How long do we need to start practicing before we can say guys are ready physically to go out there and get on the field and play a game? And are we butting up against that now?
Yeah, J-Dub, you're more qualified than me to answer that.
I'm just saying you can't just walk onto a field and be game ready. It several weeks. That's why, we had fall ball, we had spring ball, we had all these, I never stopped practicing. And you can't just say, hey, let's do nothing for 3, 4, 5 months. Hey, we're playing a game in 2 weeks. You're asking for injuries. You're asking for it's not optimal for a program. So you're going to need at least, I'd say 3 weeks to a month to get game ready.
Yeah, you need at least 4 weeks, in my opinion, because you not only that, and those are great points, J-Dub, but your body's got to be hardened to the contact, and you haven't had any contact. And I know they limit it now, but you still have to be able to withstand that hit, that tackle, and be hardened to that. And not to mention the game prep in the facility, the film, the game plans, all that is part of it as well. And the weight sessions.
Yeah. The good part about the film session stuff, you can do that stuff not on the field. You can, now in the days of technology, you can have game film on a computer, on Huddle, or whatever teams are using now. Right. But the thing is that physical conditioning, are you going to be able to run for a full game? Are you going to be able to take those shots? Your body's just not ready if you don't give it at least a month, at least. And even then, you're running the risk of injury.
Okay, guys, why don't you say we wrap things up here in the first block of the show, because we've reached the halfway point. When we come back in the second half, some talk about some budget cuts at a big school, a little health issue for an Alabama offensive coordinator, and some bowl games that aren't necessarily profitable for at least one Big Ten school. That and more when we return for the second half of the review. You are listening to the review here on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
If you smell what the Rock is cooking.
Enjoy all of our shows from the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. The OSG Sports app is up and running. Download it today.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency, or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinski of Apolinski & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Congratulations, you've made it to the second block of the show. This
Congratulations.
is the review on the online.
You made it this far, you get a high and hearty handshake.
Congratulations to all.
Socially distanced pat on the back.
The second half of the review. It's the part where we get into news, notes, nuggets, things left unsaid. Guys, we talked in the first half of the show about the kind of the elephant in the room, which is the impact of COVID on college football and whether or not we're going to actually see games here come the end of August, beginning of September. But in the meantime, there's some other things going on as well. Probably the one that's most noteworthy, at least to me, is word out of Tallahassee that Florida State is slashing its athletic department budget by 20%, and that includes its coaches, among them being new head coach Mike Norvell taking a 25% cut. Guys, it's really hitting home that some schools here are taking it on the chin here when it comes to finances, or are they just cutting ahead of time in anticipation?
I think it's both. I mean,
What's that?
I think that you're anticipating revenue that may not be there, and you're also dealing with the revenue that you don't have on hand. So I think that you're hitting it both ways. Other coaches, men's and women's hoops, 15% pay cut. 80, Dave Coburn sees his salary reduced by 20%. 25 full-time jobs within the athletic department being eliminated, and that the department's budget slashed by 20%. Now here's a partial list of schools that have done cost-cutting measures because of where we are, and I'll try to read it quickly. Arizona, Boise, Colorado, Illinois, Iowa, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Louisville, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Northern Illinois, Oklahoma, Oregon twice, Rutgers, South Carolina, Syracuse, Southern Cal, Texas, San Antonio, Wake, Wazoo, Western Kentucky, Western Michigan, West Virginia, Wyoming.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah, well, it's a sign of the times currently, because you're dealing with coming through the end of one fiscal year, heading into the next fiscal year. So you're looking at your books, you're looking at that envelope that came in the mail from your bank to tell you what your balance is, and you're trying to project going forward as to what may or may not be there. Because if you have schedule compression, if you have a full schedule, if you don't have fans in the stands at 100%, if you have percentages, if you have no one in the stands, that revenue that you're counting on, all that game day revenue is not going to be there. And if you're looking at it from your football perspective, once again, I mentioned it in the first segment of the show, it's that trickle down to the other sports, the non-revenues and the break-evens. And so it's a bunch of different things. So I think it's looking at your books now and anticipating what may or may not be there. And it does not mention that these jobs won't come back online if your revenue is found. Right now, I think they're looking at the revenue that they have on hand.
In the case of Florida State, I'm thinking it might have a little bit to do with the fact that they may owe a football coach by the name of Willie Taggart the sum of $14 million.
$1 billion.
Is
You
this
don't
what
think
we
there's
see?
not negotiations going on right now between Taggart's representatives and Florida State to bring that number down just a little bit? I also knew one of the factors with FSU was the season ticket base for football has declined quite a bit.
Because we suck. That's why. We are average. And when Tallahassee is average, folks do not travel from Central Florida to be a part of game day. When you struggle and you reschedule Delaware State so you can become bowl eligible, when you're struggling to do those kinds of things, when people don't want to travel from Atlanta for 4 hours, they don't want to travel from Panama City to watch your game days, you got to do stuff. And once again, I think that's another element to all of this, Wilkie, that when you're mediocre, folks don't want to come see you. Season ticket base goes, then you got to figure out what to do. And unfortunately, it's with personnel.
But then
we'll
you
chalk
look at
that down as touching a nerve. And I hope, Phil, you play the Seminole War chant during that rant.
There might have been that might have factored into me kind of throwing this one out there.
Well, you could have also mentioned the head coach at that school in College Station that I admire so much.
but that means he would be fishing for information.
And then you could also talk about the current head coach and then him not being all that honest about being in contact with his current players and starting off that relationship on the right foot.
Oh, that's a whole other conversation there, though, that we touched on a few weeks ago.
Good Lord.
But kind of talking about these cuts and being preemptive, I'm going back to Kansas, big surprise, rock chalk. But you look at what AD Jeff Long did out there. You take their, wait the week. But you look at, the coaches out there. You have the Mad Hatter. You've got Bill Self, people who are making arguably a little bit of money. Mm-hmm. Who I think they said they were taking 10% pay cuts this year. Trying to save like $650,000. I guess that's a good attempt to try to save some of that down ripple stuff. If you can save money now and get rid of that, you're saving baseball, you're saving, rowing and some of these other non-revenue sports that they're going to get cut if they can't find the money to recoup somewhere.
Yeah, it shudders me to think that if we don't have a college football season, what the implications are as far as, because I know some of the bigger schools, their debt load might be pretty good. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've made the cuts and the furloughs and the job cuts as well. But they still have a little bit of revenue coming in as far as the TV money and perhaps boosters. And I'm just talking about the upper echelon of the Power Five. Others just don't have that. So,
I think there's
in the first block we talked about the possibility of the conference only scheduling and so forth. But we've just talked about cuts at Florida State, and Stanford just went through a major reduction of sports, and others have done that. I know some baseball programs that have been eliminated. I shudder to think what it's going to be like if the college football season, and to go a little further, if we have another year where the NCAA men's basketball tournament isn't played.
Yeah, I think I want to say there's like maybe 3-4 programs at most in the Power Five that actually have a rainy day fund. I know the University of Georgia has somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 figures in their rainy day fund, but they're the exception here rather than the
Ivy
rule.
League's got an endowment of 140 extra large. They ain't hurt either.
They ain't hurting either. You're right. And you talk about a rainy day fund. This is a hurricane. What does a rainy day fund do in a hurricane?
But then you look at up here, big news out of North Carolina this week. Former ECU head coach Ruffin McNeil left Lincoln Riley's camp in Oklahoma and came back to NC State. NC State created a special advisor to Dave Doran position to bring Ruff onto the Wolfpack staff. I really love that hire, but I mean they created it and it was like paying him like $160,000. There are some schools that are still spending some money in this time of COVID, and I fully agree with that hire.
Be interesting. Speaking of assistant coaches, word this week out of Alabama that offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian underwent a heart procedure. Our best wishes go out to Coach Sark. He's expected to make a full recovery, and Sark was a good hire last year for Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide. For all the grief that he got a good performance out of that team.
Insert what Tuscaloosa and Nick Saban do to coaches joke here.
Yeah, you could make that argument real quickly.
He's had some great relationships with his OCs, hasn't he?
Yep. The lane train.
Why does the word meat grinder come to mind?
What does it say that Saban at age 72 is either working at that same level or pushing everybody to work at the same level as him, and they're having trouble keeping up?
Because he doesn't internalize, J-Dub. When he's mad, he'll let you know. It's like, there's nothing wrong with a Saban nutty, and I think that keeps him healthy.
I mean, some of those press conferences are just absolute gold with him, and when these reporters ask these softball questions, and then he just sits there and waits a half second and then lets them have it. I'm like, I don't want to be you.
I just have this vision of some young cub reporter for the Tuscaloosa paper or some insert your small town in Alabama asking the very said question that you said, J-Dub, and then cowering.
Yep. Like, I have to ask this question because my editor tells me I have to ask it. But going back to Sark, I mean, you got to give him credit. I mean, his career has been kind of through like the Holland Tunnel for the last several years. Coming back and forth, and he had a resurgence last year. So I'm happy to see. I really hope he does and pulls through this health procedure fairly well.
Oh, he's a great offensive mind. He just had to be at the right place, right time, and he found it at Alabama.
Yeah, good on him. Some rough news here this week out of Toledo as the Rockets lost junior defensive lineman Janeel Douglas in a shooting incident near campus. One of the better players actually on the Toledo team, 6'3", 300-pounder. He was killed at a pizza place at the end of a fight. Tough news there. Hate to see that happen. And a life taken too soon. We don't know exactly what the circumstances were, but you hate to hear stuff like this in the off season, huh?
Yeah, Toledo football program has announced a GoFundMe page has been created to support the family. The school's release says the fund will help pay for funeral costs as well as assisting Douglas's children. The page was started by former teammate Mitchell Guadani, the Rockets starting quarterback the last 2 years. Quoting Mitchell, we all love Janeel and we love his family. Nate Childress and I, another former teammate, were talking about Janeel and decided we wanted to do something to help his family and his beautiful children. Janeel will always be a Rocket and he will always be in our hearts. And so there's a GoFundMe page that's been set up for the family too.
Yeah. Some more news here out of the Big Ten. And this is something that's always been a sticking point to me about college football bowl games. Guys, did you know that it cost Indiana $44,000 to lose to Tennessee in the Gator Bowl this past year?
Rocky Top!
Talk about how great it is. It's great. We're going to a bowl game.
Hey, how often does Indiana go to bowl games?
Because we do so well, they're losing money.
Well, what was even worse is that they were up to like 22-9 on, Jeremy Pruitt's, Volunteers. And they're like, our first bowl win since like 1981. And then all of a sudden, Jarrett Guarantano brings them back and they win 23-22. I'm like, add insult to injury, but I'm not upset. I'm actually happy after the year that Tennessee had last year. Started Georgia State.
So how many bowl games does Indiana go to in program history?
It was their first postseason win since the 1991 Copper Bowl.
But it goes back to a bigger issue to me, and that's the thing the hang up I have with bowl games. They're not this big bonanza for people. They cost money. It costs the Hoosiers spent over $2 million.
And some of the boosters and some of the loyal fans, are there loyal fans of Indiana football?
Apparently.
Went down to Jacksonville for a nice little holiday, couple days during the holiday. How often do they go to Jacksonville, Florida? I mean,
here's your breakdown.
Before you get started, see right behind me there. There's a banner that Nelson found me years ago for the bowl game that I was at. The Poulan Weed Eater Bowl, the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Been to that bowl.
As and Wake Forest went down to play Oregon. So I mean, we got money out of that deal. So it was back then. Of course, that was 1992. But that's. I agree with you now. Bowl games aren't the boon that they were back then. But Wake Forest actually got some money out of that deal.
Actually, who doesn't want to go to the Bahamas for a bowl game?
Oh, I know, really. I want to go to the Bahamas for that bowl game. Here's your breakdown of your costs. Flights to Jacksonville cost a little over $690,000. Another $145,000 in ground travel. Those are some expensive Ubers. Meals. $337,000 for meals. How is that not a covered expense? Hotel costs amount to $219,250. Uniforms and bowl apparel, I guess because you got new unis for the bowl game.
Yeah.
Patches.
Oh yeah, got that patch.
$250,000. for uniforms and bowl apparel. Also, $110,930 for awards, which includes commemorative rings for players in the game. The band and cheerleading team account for a combined $174,000 in expenses, including $156,000 for IU's Marching 100.
That's crazy. That is absolutely insane. How do you spend $700,000 just flying people down to Jacksonville?
They're large.
Cash
It's
on
not an
hand.
easy place to get to, but still.
They're large people.
They had the cash on hand.
Buses are cheaper.
It just blows my mind. Mind blown. And now we got one for Brother J-Dub because he made a guest appearance here. So we will talk about his alma mater.
This is no guest appearance. This is a recurring guest starring role in his Quinn Martin production.
Yeah, keep coming back.
A new name for his home field, as BB&T Field will be no longer. It will forever now, or at least as long as the sponsorship deal goes, be known as Truist Field.
Yeah.
Truest words have never been spoken. But yeah, it's to me.
Talk to
this
this Atlanta Braves fan about Truist. I'm aware of this.
But the thing about this, I mean, when I was there, Grove Stadium, Bridger Fieldhouse, you changed to BB&T Field. John Curry, the new AD there. I mean, when he got run out of Tennessee by the Fighting Fulmers, came back to. John Curry was actually at Wake Forest when I was there, and it just, to me, this is just a merger. BB&T and SunTrust merged into Truist. The logo doesn't look very interesting. It's already on the
it's pretty nondescript.
To me, I mean, a lot of the comments I've seen from like the Winston-Salem Journal, WXII up here, like, it still Groves to me. I'm like, it's still Groves. It's just Truist Field at Grove Stadium. And the thing with Wake Forest is that none of the major fields are actually on campus. Like soccer, field hockey is on campus, but Lawrence Joel Veterans Memorial Coliseum basketball is off campus. Now Truist Field's off campus. So I mean, they're kind of wine and cheese fans anyway, and I love them to death, But Wake Forest, it only holds 31,500, and I bet you money that majority. I mean, I remember back in the days when I was there, there were majority, like when NC State came into Grove Stadium, 3/4 of those fans were wearing the red and white and black. And it's, to me, it's just money. Money talks. And this is just another.
The Deeks were 8-5 last year. They played well. They were a good team.
But Dave Clawson, I mean, took over from Jim Grove. I mean, they're playing really well. I mean, you still got Sage Surratt on the sidelines. I mean, you've got some people that are some weapons. I hated to see a quarterback leave, but I mean, we got plenty of people coming up. But Sage Surratt's a monster, and they're a good team that nobody watches. And it's sad because when I was there, President Tom Hearn almost wanted to get rid of athletics because academics was the focus of the university. And there was a big push in the boosters to keep athletics on the field. And Bill Dooley fought really hard back in the early 90s to make sure athletics stayed around. So I think Wake Forest still doesn't have a softball team. So It's like it's still, it's just a numbers game. It's kind of like, when FedEx Field threw money at Washington said you need to change the name, and it's a money talk thing. To me, this is a no-brainer. It's still Grove Stadium.
Looking forward to hearing Stan Cotton and Dave Gorin call it Truist Field.
Guys, you got anything you want to talk about this week? We've kind of hit the point where I've gone through everything on my list. You got anything on yours?
It's good to have J-Dub back.
Yeah,
it is. Been way too long.
Too damn long is the medical term.
Yep. Too damn long. Well, one thing, since you brought me back, and I alluded to it, and we haven't talked about it, thank you for not. I'm hearing out of off Twitter, the reliable source that is the Twitterverse, that within the next 48 hours, the Redskins will have a new name. There's a report that came out from Yahoo Sports, Charles Robinson, depending on how trustworthy that is, that a request has gone out to other teams to start taking the logo off of their social media accounts. So be interesting to see what's going to happen there over the next 48 hours. But I'm hearing that Red Tails, Warriors, and Presidents are leading the charge for mascots. I personally want Red Wolves. I think that's a really cool mascot. Imagine 80,000 people at FedEx Field howling after a score.
Is a red wolf indigenous to that particular part of geography?
No, the Red Wolves are in North Carolina.
Okay. Hey, Wilkie.
So, as the resident Cowboy fan here, the Cowboy Presidents rivalry just doesn't ring the same to me.
No, it doesn't.
One thing to note this week, guys, the SEC athletic directors are scheduled to gather this week and talk about the upcoming season. Should be really interesting to see how that plays out. Any guesses here before we wrap up?
Yeah, the majority of that conversation is going to be about testing and the procedures that need to be taken for their athletes. They're not going to get into the weeds as far as the scheduling yet. This is more kind of a preamble to what decisions need to be made in the next few weeks and what to do going forward. So I wouldn't expect any big news coming out of that meeting other than perhaps testing procedures, but and other boring stuff. But as we said at the top of the show, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 are taking a reasonable approach to this, and we'll see what they come up with in the next few weeks.
Yeah, Big 12 is also having an athletic directors meeting next week as well to talk about the same thing.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. It seems like just when you think we're past everything and then we can get back to talking about conference previews and what's going to happen on the field.
Yeah.
That's when the other shoe seems to drop.
Now, Phil, we got some time left.
We got about 3 minutes.
All right. I'm going to throw this out at you guys.
Okay.
Since we've been talking about scheduling and everything.
Okay.
Why can't the SEC and the ACC combine a schedule?
I like it.
Why can't Big 12 and the SEC combine a schedule?
Like an emergency realignment plan?
Yeah. Exactly.
I think the Pac.
I'd love to see the Arkansas
the Big 12 and the Pac-12.
Yeah. Well, I mean, remember what we were talking about a couple weeks ago about the what was it, the Fun Belt and Confusa?
Yeah.
Yep.
It makes sense for these conferences to line up. Why not? It gives you some options. It gives you some teams that you may not have necessarily had on the schedule, and it kind of gives you something to look forward to because it's something a little different, and it lowers your travel cost.
J-Dub, I'd love to see Virginia Tech and Tennessee play again. That's such a natural rivalry.
The Battle of Bristol.
Yeah, I'd love to see Arkansas and Oklahoma play. It's such a natural rivalry.
And like this year, didn't they talk about bringing the Kansas-Missouri rivalry back? So, I mean, it's like, there's no downside to some of these emergency assignments. It's just not.
Yeah, it just depends on how.
It's going to take a lot of smoothing over for that KU-Missouri rivalry to come back, though.
It's not really a rivalry.
I think they came up with the lead for next week's show.
Guys, why did you say we wrap things up here on this episode? We've covered a lot of ground. Again, for those of you at home, if you want to get our phone app, it's free. Go to the Google Play Store, go to the Apple Store, look up OSG Sports. We're right there. Really, really easy to find. You get all of our content here, plus you get content from our friends up in Canada at barnburner.ca. And those guys cover just about every sport that we don't. Gives you a well-rounded product. You can find us online at OSG Sports just about anywhere. If you're watching this on YouTube, you've already found us there at OSG Sports. Same thing for Twitter, same thing for Facebook. We're on the Zingo.tv app. You're going to have to look that one up and take John's word for it on that. But we're there.
We're everywhere. We're everywhere.
So many places, so many different opportunities. You can catch the podcast on Stitcher and pretty much every other podcasting application that you could ever possibly think of.
Spotify, SoundCloud.
You name it, we're there.
You name it, we are there. So for the rest of the OSG Sports team, I am OSG Phil. He is Brother J-Dub, OSG J-Dub. OSG Nelson up here, John Nelson, who knows his own self, and of course the incomparable John Wilkerson at JWilkerson16. We are the Online Sports Guys. Guys, thank you everybody for joining the show this week. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we will be back next week with the latest and greatest in college football. Have a great week, everybody. So long.